you're doing stuff. Okay?
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Brian, Rachel, Selassie, Alan, Brian.
Hi, Paul.
How are we?
Paul.
Hey, Paul.
Hi, Rachel.
If you could just test your audio, video, make sure everything is ready.
Hi everyone, am I coming through all right?
Yeah, you're very clear. Okay.
Excellent.
Perfect, thank you. It's a pleasure to meet all of you.
This must be Michael. Man, people have logged in.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon. Hi,
Hi, Jacqueline.
Hi.
can you hear me, right?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Perfect. Thanks.
Hello, testing, mic 1, 2. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes. Yes,
Awesome.
we can. Okay.
Selassie, you're a bit dark. If you could change and face the light.
Hey, everyone. Hey, Rachel. Ready?
Hi. Yes.
Good, good. Jacqueline, wonderful to see you. Selassie, we meet at
Hi.
last.
Yes,
Good?
yes. Yeah, I'm good. I'm good.
Excellent. Yeah, Paul, what are you drinking? I hope you'll stay sober throughout this. I think I saw Michael. You okay? I think I saw you there.
Yes, hi, how are you? It's a pleasure to meet.
Oh, fantastic. Great, great to make your acquaintance. So let's see who's missing. I think Asha. Oh, Alan, there you are. Can we see you? Can we hear you, Alan?
Oh, yes, I can hear you. I'm still trying to get my video started. Still misbehaving.
Okay, okay. Yeah, hopefully we don't need to discipline that video. I might need to send a border to bring you a video or something.
Let me have it sorted.
Okay, and I see Boye. Is your video working this time? Hey, Boye. Boye, can you hear us? Okay, I see you. Excellent, good. All the way from Lagos, he's here. Okay, fantastic. I see Ashna is joining us here. Who else is missing? I think Dr. Asha. Let's see. Okay, it's just Asha we're waiting for, but otherwise the team is set. We usually start on time and end on time. Brian, anything from Devon?
No, let me just check with him quickly.
Okay. Devon is a member of our oversight group. It's like the board of AIRA. So he'll be making the opening remarks. So hopefully we get him on board. If not, yeah, we will step in and do the needful. Okay, wonderful. So we'll start right in 5 minutes. Okay, so see you all shortly.
Okay.
Well, member must disappear too.
Fernando, can you speak louder? Can you speak louder? Really? Let's go.
Posti picha na comment vizuri. Mbona jana sasa leo tunasikia ofisi ndio hapa nimekuja
You can help me see. Okay, Brian, we can take down the screen. Brian Rodney, we can take down the screen. You okay? Okay, excellent. I'm just checking to see if Devon is here. Devon is a member of the oversight group, but I will take his place for now. My name is Ashanut Okile. Welcome everyone to our fourth AIRA talks, looking at data governance, opportunities, and challenges. The Africa Internet Rights Alliance is an alliance that brings together 10 civil society organizations that work across the African continent, really advancing, advocating for digital rights. We are going to play a video in a minute that will tell you a little bit more about AIRA before we start our conversation.
In October 2020, 9 African organizations across the continent came together. We stand for accountability, inclusion, equity, and digital rights for all on the African continent. The African Internet Rights Alliance collectively works to address the inequalities and challenges we face online that are also reflected offline. As the internet and technology become more and more integrated into the lives of Africans, we face new challenges to our human rights in the digital context, including unequal access, internet shutdowns and restrictions, and violence online. Join us in the movement to advance inclusive and equitable digital rights for all on the African continent.
Okay, so welcome. So that's who we are as the African Internet Rights Alliance. The AIRA Talks is really an opportunity for us to engage, have conversations with policymakers, civil society leaders, activists, academia, the public, really to discuss what kind of policy, what kind of legal frameworks we would like on this continent for equitable and accessible digital rights for all on the continent. So this is our fourth AIRA Talks, and we are really excited. I'm going to hand over to Rachel, who works with CIPIT, which is an institute at Strathmore University in Kenya. She'll introduce herself and introduce the panelists and moderate this conversation. Rachel, you're welcome.
Thank you so much, Ashanut. So as Ashanut has mentioned, this is the fourth AIRA talk, and we'll be having 3 other talks, 3 more talks over the year. So to view our previous AIRA talks, please visit our YouTube channel, which is AIRA Digital Rights. And you can also follow us on our social media pages, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook, to learn more about what you do as an alliance. So the details will be shared on the charts. They have already been, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Brian. And we will also be recording this session. So we welcome you to engage with us and to just share your coverage on what you will learn out through the session. So I will go on to introduce the panel. So for this session, I would ask you to please have your videos on as you introduce yourself. Just say your name and what you do. Thank you. So we'll start with Paul. Paul Kimumwe.
Yes, good afternoon, good morning. I'm not sure there is evening. My name is Paul Chimumwe. I work with the Spaces Collaboration International ICT Policy for Eastern Southern Africa. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, Paul. We'll now go on to Asha. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm Asha Abinala from Tanzania, representing Media Convergency and very interested in the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Asha. Welcome. We'll now go on to Selassie.
Okay, good afternoon, good evening, I'm sure, wherever you are connecting from. My name is Selassie. I'm a research fellow at the Human Security Research Center in Ghana, and we work into advancing digital rights, human rights, national security issues in Ghana and indeed across the rest of Africa.
Thank you, Selassie. We'll now go on to Adeboye.
Hi, everyone. My name is Adeboye Adegoke. I'm with Paradigm Initiative. Paradigm Initiative is a Pan-African digital inclusion and rights organization working to advance the cause of digital rights and digital inclusion on the continent. I work there as a senior program manager. And as part of our work, we've done a lot of work in terms of advocating for the right to privacy within the context of new and emerging technology. And also in the age of data, we have done a lot of work trying to push for effective data governance system across the continent in different countries where we have a footprint. It's an honor and a pleasure for me to be part of this conversation and share perspective, and also listen to the perspectives that will be shared by the other panelists on this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Adeboye. Next we'll have Michael.
Hello, colleagues, and thank you, Rachel. My name is Michael Power. I'm a director and co-founder at HELT Advisory based in South Africa. HELT Advisory is a public interest advisory firm. We're a group of public interest lawyers, researchers, and technologists working on the triad of information and digital rights and ultimately seeking to achieve positive change in Africa. I look forward to the conversations this afternoon and to the engagements with fellow panelists. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Michael. Next we'll have Alan.
Oh, thanks, Rachel. Sorry, my video's been misbehaving, but I've been able to come through. Hello, everyone. My name is Alan Sempala Chigozi. I work with Unwanted Witness as programs head and legal. Unwanted Witness has been at it since 2012. We've been at the intersection of technology law and human rights. We have initiated a number of campaigns and initiatives in line with digital rights. Our hope is that Africa gets to realize human rights and good governance in a manner that it should be handled. Otherwise, I'm happy to be here and I'm happy to engage.
Thank you, Alan. Lastly, we'll have Jacqueline.
Rachel?
We'll have Jacqueline. Thank you, Alan. Next, we'll have Jacqueline. I think I was on mute, sorry.
She may have dropped off, Rachel. So I suggest you continue and then we'll introduce her when she comes on.
Okay. She's actually on the call. Like we can't hear her. Okay, we'll just proceed on to the next session. So as Ashinit had mentioned, we live in an age where there's so much data that is being collected, being used, being distributed, and that's why we need data governance. So our able panelists and very esteemed members of the panel will actually be sharing their thoughts and insights and experience and just further this conversation so that you can get to learn a thing or two from them. So I will now go on to introduce Paul, who will share the key findings from a study that CPESA conducted on data governance in Africa. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks so much, Rachel, to Ashana to AIRA for putting together this wonderful meeting, and to the fellow panelists, but also to the participants that have logged in. You're very welcome. My name is Paul Chimumwe. As I've mentioned, I work with the SPESA. SPESA is Collaboration International ICT Policy for East and Southern Africa, a think tank on digital rights and good governance and accountability. Our work on data governance spans different projects. Initially, as we're beginning the discussions on this particular talk, we thought would focus a bit on the exact work that we're doing with the colleagues within Nigeria, PIN, Tanzania, ASHA, then Kictanet in Kenya, and of course, Selassie in Ghana. But as the discussions went on, we realized that data governance is beyond just one project. It has different components, and so what I'm going to present is not exactly key findings from that particular study, but overall broadly the work that we've been doing around issues of privacy, data protection that constitute that governance. So as SPESA, we try as much as possible to, one, produce research, but also support civil society organizations that are working on these digital rights, and for this particular purpose, data governance. So we would want to promote data openness among public and private sectors, as well as respect for data rights towards citizen participation and informed policy decisions in rights respecting data for development initiatives. So a summary of the findings from the different researches that we have done on data governance, issues of privacy, issues of surveillance, encryption on data localization, we realized that increasingly different governments have embraced so many data collection initiatives, including the mandatory SIM card registration, national IDs, the voter registration, the birth and registration, people registering and applying for passports. All these initiatives are good because the collection and processing of data is very important, especially for informing policy development, informing the government planning. But the main issue here, I think, in terms of digital rights is for many of the programs that are going on, there are no adequate product protection laws, and most of them are being conducted via mid-site weak oversight mechanisms, and even the remedies for anybody who has been aggrieved are not existing. And so for the last so many years, different countries, especially on the continent, have enacted or in the process of enacting data protection laws, which is a good thing because I think as of now, more than 50% of the 54 countries have specific data protection laws. And then also privacy is within their national constitutions. Unfortunately, many of these laws that have been enacted do not measure up to international standards in as far as the protection of privacy and data, personal data is concerned. Many of them for remedies, they do not provide for rights of data subjects, especially in terms of correcting the information. They do not provide for timelines if data is being collected. The timelines for which and purposes for which data is being collected is not provided for, and then also they do not provide clear oversight of who is in charge of the data protection and privacy in a given country. And this is especially so for countries that do not have specific data protection laws. You find that there are very many data collection initiatives that have been going on, as I mentioned earlier, for SIM card registration, and all these are being manned by different entities. So there is no central authority organization that is in charge of managing and providing guidance and oversight for all these data protection, data collection initiatives. And then number two is that during the COVID pandemic, several countries adopted the regulations, policies, and practices, one, to try and mitigate, but also respond to the pandemic. And everybody appreciated. But what was happening is that they initiated a lot of technology, they used a lot of technology, and they were collecting a lot of personal data. And as I said earlier, if we are collecting people's data, but without any clear guidelines, no oversight, no clear purpose for which data is being collected, so there are no limitations within what data, personal data is being collected, and who controls, who manages the processing, the sharing, there are no rules and regulations. It becomes very difficult for people to start trusting you. So what happened, like in Uganda and Kenya, there were incidents where there are very many data breaches, in that people who had shared their data found themselves being attacked, especially in Uganda on Facebook, when we had just announced the first cases of COVID. We had a number of people who had coming in from Dubai, and they were encouraged to go and test. So some of them, because of the stigma that was around that time, many of them had not shown up for testing or shown up to the Ministry of Health for follow-up. And we had cases where their personal data were being shared on Facebook, on other social medias, and they were being threatened. So one wonders, how did the individuals, again, get access to personal data that had only been shared with the Ministry of Health and the travel agents at the airport? So it became a bit challenging. And of course, we not even in Kenya, the incidents where personal data was being shared, especially that was being collected so massively. And we note that if there are no clear rules and regulations on data protection, data breaches can happen. In 2016, there were reports of voter information that was being collected by the Electoral Commission. That was again published on a private website. I think the boy can shed some light on this when he's speaking. So we note that because of these very many different incidents, the appetite for participation in data initiatives, especially by the ordinary persons, becomes low, simply because people are not sure how is my data going to be used, how is my data going to be shared, and with who. So, and because we have had cases of where people's data has been shared and it has been used, abused, most people, especially for some of these government programs, even when they are well-intentioned, people are very hesitant to go and share their data because of the perception that, one, if I give my personal information, it can be used against me. And also, a lot of personal information is being collected. Some of it may not actually be as useful as for a particular purpose, especially because we note that even for SIM card registration, they were collecting fingerprints. People were questioning, why would you need my fingerprints if you are just registered me for a SIM card? And so we note that overall, while it is important for government to collect and process information and personal data to aid in programming, policy formulation, development initiatives, it is also very critical that all these programs are conducted within the frameworks of the law. One, the laws should be very watertight, they should be very clear, and they should be disseminated for the public to understand and appreciate what their rights are as data subjects. But also, when they are doing these application programs, one, both the government and private entities, they need to explain clearly the purpose of the purpose for which the data is being collected, and the lifetime. I mean, because you cannot keep somebody's data forever. And also, data subjects should have a right to go and correct if in case there are changes in addresses, changes in metastatus, they should be able to go and correct that information within the data controller's area. So I think government and private entities are collecting data, but they are collecting them wrongly. Some of them, in some of the countries, as I mentioned, they do not have specific laws on data protection. And this causes a big problem because data is always shared, and governments, a lot of times, even when there are provisions for judicial oversight in countries like Tanzania, where you need judicial oversight to access somebody's data, we note that several governments, agencies do not actually adhere to these provisions. They can just go and get data. We had an incident here in Uganda where security operatives went and searched and also seized personal data from one of the telecom companies, that is MTN. And so they did not even ask for court, they did not seek a court order. They just went, and because they said they suspected that MTN probably was not reporting or was evading payment of taxes. So data governance becomes very critical. And for us as for society and different actors, we need to be following up on these things, because yes, government is doing well in collecting and processing data, but they should be doing that within the frameworks of the law. I would want to stop here for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. That was very, very insightful. I will now ask Michael to share with us findings from the 2021 study by OGP on the existing challenges and opportunities in data governance. Over to you, Michael Powell.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and thank you, Paul, for the wonderful overview of your recent reporting. Brian, can I just ask for share screen if possible? Thank you.
Yes, please.
Rachel, can you just confirm that my screen share is on? Perfect. Thank you very much. So thank you, colleagues. I've been asked to speak for just around 10 minutes, so I've got a brief slide deck for you. And really what I hope to go through is to further the conversation that Paul started and really address some opportunities and challenges to data governance in Africa. In doing so, I'm hoping just to provide a brief overview of sort of the broader data governance framework and where data protection falls within that particular framework. Then I turn to look to recent research that we were commissioned to prepare for the Open Government Partnership, including some of the findings that we made. And the reason that research may be useful for today's conversation is really for us to learn from the data protection space to help us more broadly understand the data governance space. Thereafter, looking more broadly at data governance, I'll turn to some challenges that we're seeing, as well as strategic entry points for colleagues on the call, civil society, stakeholders, and members of the Alliance. And then lastly, a brief note on collective action for further discussion during this webinar. So turning then just to frame sort of the ecosystems within which we're playing, increasingly we're seeing the use of the terms data governance and data protection and privacy being used interchangeably, but they do fulfill slightly different roles, in as much as data governance is the broader ecosystem in which we look at the interoperability between systems and actors, the development of standards, which is, I think, going to frame a lot of our conversation today, developing the digital economy, questions of cybersecurity, and the protection of personal information. So at least from my perspective, when I think of data governance more broadly, I'm looking at a variety of laws, which would include electronic transactions, cyber crimes, protection of personal information, and consumer protection. If we look at data protection in specific, we're focusing squarely there on the rights-based question of privacy and the general principles around fair and lawful use, transparency, accuracy, accountability, and limitations. So when I conceptualize data governance, I see data protection as sort of one element within a far broader data governance framework. And as we develop the conversations today, questions around the Continental Free Trade Agreement are really going to come into play about looking at data governance as enabling development and data protection as ensuring safeguards against privacy rights violations. Turning then to the overview of the study that we completed. So we were commissioned by the Open Government Partnership, which is a multilateral initiative which seeks to foster commitments from states to ensure open government. There are presently 14 African states that are OGP members, and we were tasked with looking at the data protection legislation that was in place or is in place in those 14 jurisdictions, and really identifying three broad areas for potential reform, being legislative provisions relating to transparency, accountability, and participation. So the research was both desk-based as well as consultations with a variety of stakeholders. And the end result of the research was the identification of 18 focus areas and 16 recommendations. Once I conclude my presentation today, I'll share a link to that research report if it's of interest to anyone who is party to the discussion today. If I turn then to the key findings of the study, here we rely on some of these findings to frame a broader data governance debate. We identified in the 12 of the 14 OGP states that have data protection legislation in place, that in the main, there were vague and broad legislative exemptions, particularly around national security, and there was limited application of frameworks to foreign entities. So as we grow into a developmental space and want to discuss data flows in Africa, the application of data flows and our legislation, inclusive of safeguards to foreign entities, is something for us to reflect on. If we then turn to the sort of three broad categories that we investigated, in terms of transparency, notably, we identified that in the present legislation, there's a need for strengthening breach notification. So where data breaches take place, data subjects, in our view, should have more precise legislative guidance when it comes to breach notifications, how they can exercise their rights when these notifications take place. And also the need for the further development of data processing registers by data protection authorities, which I'll refer to going forward as DPAs. In terms of accountability, which is important for our conversation today, we identified a need for further judicial, policing, and legal expertise to ensure that civil liability can flow from privacy rights violations. Also, there was an enhanced need to facilitate the powers to investigate and sanction by data protection authorities. And this is linked to another one of our findings, which was the need to enhance institutional independence and ensure appropriate resourcing for DPAs to ensure that they exercise effective oversight over data protection within their jurisdictions. And then lastly, in terms of participation, we noted, and it's something that Paul touched on already, that there's limited access to data through breach notifications to enable data subjects to understand how best to vindicate their right to a remedy when these breaches occur. Also, there needs to be enhanced safeguards when it comes to the right to request, correct, and delete personal data, which was a trend we developed or understood in our research, having sight of the 12 data protection laws that we were reviewing. And then lastly, we identified a need to include data protection authorities both in policy formulation at the domestic level, but equally in engagements regionally. And that's something we'll develop in our conversations today. So broadly, that was an overview of sort of the research that was conducted. As indicated, I'll share a link shortly. And if you just go through the executive summary, it should give a really useful overview of some of those key findings. If I then turn to some of the challenges that we're seeing around data governance more broadly, and those will link both through data protection, but equally around the other laws, which we would see as operative in the data governance ecosystem. First is limited expertise, and this relates to a lack of policy-making expertise and institutional capacity. So in some of the recent research that's coming out around data governance, institutional capacity seems to be one of the leading concerns alongside policy gaps. And equally, if we have sight of the trajectory or development of data protection legislation in various jurisdictions around Africa, and including the Malabo Convention, which negotiations started, I think, in 2011, it entered in 2014, and currently it's now 2022, and we only have 13 of the 15 instruments of ratification needed for the treaty to enter into force. We see that there is at least an indication of potential political inertia. Now, with that said, we have seen a series of signatures to the Malabo Convention come in recently, so it does seem that that tide is changing. But I think speaking to the data protection space, there is a concern that there may be political inertia when it comes to the broader data governance space. And then lastly, given prevailing socioeconomic circumstances on the continent, it may well be that there's a deprioritization of issues relating to digitization and data governance. In addition, there are a few processes underway, which is both a challenge and an opportunity. We're aware of the African Union's data governance framework. As far as I understand it, Smart Africa is engaged in 2 policy processes at this stage as well. and then there's a raft of domestic processes taking place. So when it comes to the role of this particular alliance and members of civil society, I'll talk shortly about the potential for civil society to act as in a harmonizing function amongst these various processes. But for present purposes, this multiplicity of processes in the data governance space, where questions of data protection are yet to be resolved, is something that may be considered as a challenge. And then lastly, rate of implementation. So we know that the rate of development in the global data-driven economy is moving at a rapid pace. Laws, regulations, and standards are often slow to develop, and I think this is going to be a persistent challenge for us going forward, in as much as we're seeking to create standards and safeguards and potentially enabling laws in a data-driven economy that is faster moving. And then lastly is for us to learn from regional integration processes. I mean, I've given the example of Malabo, which is now 11 years following negotiation and it's yet to enter into force. Another comparative example would be the migration policy framework for Africa, which first came in 2006. A revised policy was brought in 2018. And as far as I understand it, both IGAD and the East African community have now brought in sort of regional migration policies. If we look at a trickle down from continental to the regional economic communities and then domestically. So looking at rate of implementation, I think we need to be pragmatic about the pace of reform. And I think as civil society, we need to assure that, particularly in the data protection and the broader data governance space, that we exercise the requisite pressure to make sure that there's swift implementation and adoption of frameworks. And then lastly, on strategic entry points for colleagues on the call, and I would welcome further discussion on this. I think Malabo, given that we're 2 signatures away, is a potential point of departure. Now, Malabo isn't a perfect agreement. There are some complexities in some of the clauses, but given that it's likely to enter into force soon, there are opportunities around Malabo as well, such as implementing guidelines and effectively know your rights kits, which advise people on some of the protections that Malabo holds. You will recall that Malabo fills 3 of the 4 data governance boxes, and then it looks at electronic transactions, cyber crimes, and data protection. And it may be that Malabo is something to get around if it enters into force. We have the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and there's going to need to be a lot of work that's done there to facilitate the free trade area, particularly when it comes to data flows. So it's clear to me that there's a key entry point coming up around the continuing negotiations as to what after. And then lastly, I think there's space for continued engagement outside of simply data protection. I think cyber crimes around the continent, a lot of the legislation requires a lot of work, as well as questions around electronic transactions and consumer protection. Then when it comes to civil society, as I indicated earlier, there is this harmonizing role that we can play. Today's conversation is one of those spaces where we can discuss harmonization, we can agree on the appropriate strategy to ensure safeguards, a right-based approach, and ultimately inclusive development. And how we want to ensure that, as we move more broadly into data governance frameworks, how we can ensure that they're harmonized continentally in the regional economic communities and domestically. And then one of the central and most important roles I think civil society can play is public awareness and education. I don't have any proof for this particular proposition, but it strikes me that given the complexities of some of the technical terms that are required in legislating around questions of data, particularly data protection, some of the political inertia we may see is as a result of an uncertainty developing from policymakers who are simply just uncertain around some of the technical aspects which we engage with in these spaces. So civil society has a very useful space and role to play in public education and awareness around some of these technical concepts. And then lastly, just moving towards collective action. The point of departure will be understanding exactly what we want. And I think I just started working, playing around some terms, but it strikes me that what we want to work towards is ultimately data governance policy coherence and momentum to ensure a sustained rights-based approach to economic development in Africa. Rachel, it's over to you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Michael. So under one of the strategic points you mentioned, the Malabo Convention. Could you please explain more about the Malabo Convention?
Yeah, sure. So the Malabo Convention is a treaty. It's currently the African Union Convention on Cybersecurity and the Protection of Personal Information. The treaty isn't yet in force. So in terms of Article 36 of that particular treaty, 15 states need to ratify it before that particular treaty enters into force. Now, 13 states have instituted their ratification, so we're simply 2 instruments of ratification away from the Malabo. And what that does is it gives binding international treaty law, continental treaty law on questions of electronic transactions, cyber crimes, and data protection. And that, can act as a baseline for a unified continental position in relation to those 3 areas of data governance. Now, like with a lot of data protection legislation, in many ways, given that the treaty was negotiated in 2014, some elements of that treaty may not be as, I suppose, contemporary as necessary when we compare it to other regional frameworks. But the simple point of departure is right now, there's no continental-wide rights protection when it comes to privacy and particularly personal data protection. And given that this treaty is close to entry into force, it may well be that this is one point of advocacy for us to pursue alongside data governance frameworks, as well as regional implementation and national domestication.
Thank you very much, Michael. So before we go on to the panel discussion, I would like for Jacqueline Trevisan to introduce herself. She's a colleague from Latin America, and she will go on to tell us what she does. Unfortunately, we cannot hear you. No.
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for this opportunity. So my name is Jacqueline Pigato, and I'm a senior researcher at Data Privacy Brazil Research Association. We are an NGO from Brazil working on digital rights and especially on data privacy. So that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jacqueline. So I now have a series of questions for our panelists and our discussants, after which I will leave approximately 15 minutes for any additional questions from the audience. In the meantime, please feel free to drop any questions that you have for Paul and Michael, and anything that the panelists will discuss that you feel the need for them to share more. So for the first question, to Boye, what sort of actions are being carried out at a national level to advance data governance in Nigeria? Would you care to just shed more light on the state of data governance in Nigeria and, yes, the actions that are being carried out?
Thanks very much, Richard. I hope you can hear me. Please, can you confirm?
Yes, yes, I can.
Okay, all right. Yeah, thanks for confirming. I think great presentation from Paul and from Michael. I love the fact that Paul spoke to what I think is the issue that you find in most African countries, whether you're talking about Nigeria or you're talking about Uganda, you're talking about Kenya. The issues are very similar, and Paul spoke to them very clearly. And when Michael came in, Michael did help a lot by making that distinction between data protection and data governance, and even going as far as recommending roles for civil society players like us in terms of what role we can play in this whole conversation. But when you look at Nigeria, the first thing I'd like to share with everybody is the fact that whether you're talking about data governance or you're talking about data protection specifically, it is my opinion that Nigerian is not getting any of the two right. I think if you look at some countries in Africa, you can still say that maybe on the part of data protection, they are doing some positive things that you can commend. But in the case of Nigeria, but it's not like Nigeria is not doing anything. So what is Nigeria doing? I'm going to share what Nigeria is doing with you, and probably why I feel that what is being done is not appropriate. So with respect to data protection and data governance, the status quo right now is that the Nigerian government has kind of taken an approach to create a data governance system that is totally, dependent on the government. In other words, a government department has been taking responsibility for data governance in Nigeria. Now, this is without prejudice to a lot of, processes that different agencies of government are involved in. When I say different agencies, I mean different agencies that have been involved in processing of data. So whether you are looking at the agency responsible for election, agency responsible for banking services, even health services, they all have that, uncoordinated processes that are ongoing. But from a centralized point of view, an agency in Nigerian that's called the Nigerian Information Technology Development Agency issued what we know as the Nigerian Data Protection Regulation in 2019. After that, recently it has established what we know as Nigerian Data Protection Bureau. Now, the problem with all of those processes is that it was more like a shortcut to avoid, passing a law on data protection. So it's more like a government is trying to create a governance system around data protection that is not founded on a law, but executive fiat. In other words, government is trying to create a system around data governance without necessarily going through a legislative process that will have benefited from a lot of inputs from different types of stakeholders. So we have the Department of Government, creating that data protection bureau and trying to manage data governance ecosystem in Nigeria. But as it is right now, it is still not properly coordinated yet. Although the government claims that it's trying to bring every stakeholder together, everybody that is collecting data on the government side of things. But the challenge with that process is that the fact that, and I think Michael made this point, there's a lot of knowledge gap that exists, even on the part of the policy maker, on the part of government. And there's a lot of things that are being done and a lot of opportunities that are being missed in the process of trying to do something without necessarily having all the expertise required to do what needs to be done. So that's why I say, whether you're thinking in terms of data governance or data protection, I don't think Nigeria is doing well, because I feel that Nigeria should have gone through a proper legislative process, enact a data protection law, create a data protection, independent data protection agency, because the key issue out of all the things I'm talking about is the fact that data protection governance in Nigeria is not an independent system. It's just another department of government that, unfortunately, government being a data custodian itself shouldn't have self-appointed itself as being responsible for also data, governing data. Government should have created a more independent institution working with other stakeholders, so that even government agencies that are collecting data are held to some, are held accountable to some level. But it is now, it's difficult to hold government accountable for the data it collects through its many institutions that are collecting data. So that's a big problem. And there's a lot of conversations that are going on around that. Government has said that, they are open to conversation. They're still going to pursue the legislative process of enacting data protection law. But if you ask me, I have a lot of strong bias for what would have been a regional approach to data governance. But Africa is not Europe, and AU is not EU. Let's be sincere with ourselves. As much as there is a process around, bringing the Malabo Convention into force, we have to be sincere with ourselves that even if Malabo Convention comes into force today, it will not be the same thing like the GDPR, because the kind of governing system that we see in EU doesn't exist in Africa, and there is a lot of sovereign nationalistic tendencies in Africa. Every country in Africa likes to act independently, and no matter how much you try to create a regional approach to anything, there's always that challenge of African countries wanting to assert themselves as an autonomous state. So I expect that there will be that challenge even when the Malabo Convention comes into force. But just to try and limit myself to Nigeria right now, what I would see is that the government has taken certain steps in terms of creating a data governance system, but it has not been effective yet. It's more like still a learning process. A data protection review was recently created. It has not really been able to do much because it's a new system, number one. Number two is that there is also this lack of agreement among stakeholders if this, whether in terms of whether this is the way to go. A lot of people are concerned by the fact that the government was unwilling to go through the route of enacting a law that established an independent data protection agency. So there is a lot of debate in Nigeria as to whether the regulation that was issued in 2019 would be sufficient in, in the data protection conversation, and especially when you link data protection with the right to privacy. Whether that would have sufficiently catered for that aspect of data protection conversation. But like I said, this is an ongoing conversation for Nigeria, and I believe for many African countries as well. From civil society perspective, we still believe that the government needs to do more by enacting a law on data protection, by creating an independent data protection institution that is not 100% controlled by the government. When you create an independent institution, you create a multi-stakeholder governing board that give it some level of independence, and you also kind of by law make sure that it creates a process through which it makes money, so that it doesn't have to depend on government for revenue, so that government doesn't have to control it 100%. But these are conversations that needs to be had. But lastly, what I just want to also say about the entire conversation is also that when we talk in terms of role for civil society, Michael did suggest in terms of how the society needs to do a lot of work around public awareness and education, and also, and I love the point I really love is when he said in terms of also educating policymakers. But then you can only educate a policymaker that wants to be educated. Because in the Nigeria example, there has been a lot of effort to point the attention of the Nigerian government on the need to, create an independent institution and not try to just create through an executive fiat. But I also think one very important role that civil society needs to play, especially in our context in Africa, it's not, unfortunately, seen as adversarial, but because of our peculiar situation, I think multi-society organization needs to go to court, as we have seen in Kenya. I think it has helped the data governance ecosystem in Kenya a lot. The fact that civil society went to court and got judicial pronouncement on what needs to be done before the implementation of digital ID system. And I believe that multi-society needs to do that. Uganda, some civil society organizations have also gone to court because it looks as if African governments are not really very interested in doing the hard work required for data governance. So sometimes you just need to force the hand of the law. You need to force the hand of government through the law, through interpretation by the judiciary to do the right thing. So for example, Nigeria has been dragging about passing data protection law since 2011 thereabouts. So sometimes just bringing the court into the conversation might also be helpful. It's not the kind of thing you want to do because you are going to be deemed as adversarial, but sometimes it might be required. So I just want to end it on that note. Unfortunately, we might be forced to go to court, and in Nigeria, we're having that conversation already. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deboye. That was very insightful, especially on the bit regarding data protection laws and the legislation. So we'd like now to move on to Tanzania. I would like Asha to tell us the status of legislation. When Michael was talking, I couldn't help but think about the distinction between data protection and data governance. So I'd like Asha to explain to us, or rather share with us, the status of legislation on both data protection and data governance, and whether there is a clear distinction of the same in Tanzania, and to also tell us more about what the study found about the progress and the challenges of implementation. Over to you, Asha.
Thank you, Rachel. I believe you can hear me now. Yeah, so yeah, that was a very interesting conversation, and I would like to extend my thanks to CIPESA once again, because it brought on a need of understanding how other countries are operating. It has been very, very interesting in understanding and realizing how we are so similar in so many ways, especially when it comes to the fact that the government has a very central and big role to play when it comes to having laws in this country. So the status right now, from the time we were doing the research last time, just a few months before the Tanzania project, the Tanzania digital project was announced, the finding then was that we had yet to have any conversation surrounding a need of having a data protection and privacy law. And I would like to acknowledge that yes, right now the government is bringing on board a law on data governance and privacy. And as we speak, they are in the stages of engaging a variety of stakeholders to contribute to the bill which has been produced, which is to be presented into the law. So we are very curious and very interested, but I would say, I would really say that I'm happy we've had an opportunity to share concerns, opinions of what the law should look like, what it should be, and how best it can be of practice. They've been very willing and welcoming, but of course we do understand that being willing and welcoming is different from passing the draft itself. So we're very curious, interested to get the first draft to be presented as a bill, to get to see if at all it will fit into the challenges that we identified last time when we were doing the study specifically for Tanzania. So Media Convergence based in Dar es Salaam did the study on behalf of CPESA to get to understand how data governance was, how what the state was, how was it identified, how was it how was the conversation being perceived and such. And generally, I would say it's an area which had a very few people interested, and that is across sectors. Very few people interested in the conversation. And I'm really glad that the last 18, I would say almost 18 months, has brought on a lot of interest of people on the subject, be it from development partners, be it from the civil society community, and be it from the stakeholders, the stakeholders itself. So I would say that the challenges identified have been very insightful in understanding how it would be best going forward with when we have the law on in place, because some of the challenges, as much as they were identified as part of as challenges of part of why we don't have the law, they are still very integral into solving to make sure that we have a law that is workable and that is going to be very effective. We've one of the biggest challenges we was there is that as much as it is identified, yes, our constitution identifies the need of protection of a person in general. And even the legal research team, when they went through the laws, we had around 8 to 9 laws which somehow mentioned either protection or privacy in one way or another, but there was a lot of gap into addressing the data protection and privacy in general. And one of the challenges which we identified was a number of clauses in most of the laws which were available. For instance, just the recent Cybercrime Act, which was passed in 2015, provides for prohibition of surveillance of person and interception of persons' communication under Section 4 and 5 and 6. But nevertheless, as much as this entity, which might be very positive in the aspect of data protection and privacy, it is bypassed. They're not really practiced. And even when Paul was presenting here, he did mention the aspect of why and how most of our respective authorities in Tanzania, and I would say the police, tend to bypass the proper channels of practicing what is right and what is wrong towards the victim. So that is one of the challenges. The other challenge we would say, and it has been discussed here a lot by the prior speaker, is a lack of interest. So data, as much as when we sit here, we talk about data protection, we talk about privacy and how it is very important. A lot of people in the sectors, different sectors, tend not to understand what it really means, how it really touches them, and how it is very important and significant for them to be on board. Because the more players and more stakeholders and more people who are interested into these laws and passing of these laws, the more it is effective in implementation. But then again, the more we are assured of that the laws would be, the need of the law being speed up into making sure that it is enacted would be almost guaranteed. So apart from the challenge of having a very few stakeholders, there is then a challenge of making sure you have stakeholders on board who get to understand that there is a need to do this. You need to be on board, you're one of the players, and some of the countries which were part of the research are very lucky that, for instance, in their civil society community, they have a lot of actors and players when it comes to practicing and looking closely at what entails privacy and protection of data. But for us, it's a challenge as a nation. We have a very few people, I would say very few civil organizations working in the space, but as we go on, the number is picking up and interest is picking up, and we're hoping for the best. But talking about stakeholders, we are not only talking about civil society, we are also talking about media practitioners, because the media practitioners have a very huge role. They have a very huge role. They have means and ways to reach out to people and to the community for them to get to understand, driving towards another challenge where you find citizens themselves do not understand the need of their information being protected. So, so you have a community which don't understand that what is being done is not right. You need to understand that this is wrong, and then you have one body which would help be a very central player into making sure that the community understand. But then again, they also don't understand. So I would say that is one of the most complex challenges I will ever identify, apart from the lack of the law itself. The other thing which we also identified, and I would like to acknowledge that currently the government, respective authorities are very positive, very keen to listen to contribution. They're keen to sit down and discuss the best ways forward and everything. And but then, as much as everything, there is poor technological infrastructure and capacity for such respective authorities. So even if even if there are conversations there also has to be an infrastructure there. There has to be enough human resources to make sure that whatever information which is to be known, however the laws which are, the best ways the laws have to be practiced have to be known, and all the entities and requirements in regards to the best way to make sure that we have a data protection and privacy law which will work. So the research itself was not looking, it was just not looking at a lack of data, at the lack of data privacy law and protection. We're looking at practices and how individuals play a very central role into making sure they understand, into making sure that it is practiced. Because today, if you have a citizen who get to understand that it is my right to ask, why are you collecting this information? Then whomever who's collecting that information, then they're stopped and they're now keen, they're also willing to get to understand how they should introduce or how they should practice collection of information, making sure that people making sure that they're not collecting information which is not required, sorry for the noise in background, making sure that they're not collecting information which is not required at that moment, because now that is also a challenge, driving to another challenge. You go to a place and people are collecting information, and when they collect the information, they don't, so normally when a citizen wants a certain service at a certain center, at center A, whatever they'll be requested in regards to their information, they will provide. But sometimes you find that half of the information they're being asked is irrelevant to whatever service they want. If a citizen gets to understand that the information which is supposed to be shared has to be at least at this of this much, then it will also help a practitioner to be very careful. So we found on some situation, you find that there is a lot of information. I remember last time when we had a conversation with the minister himself then, himself, Dr. Ndugulile, said they did a study in their constituency. They are just collecting random information and papers around the street. And the street had information of people. You find mobile numbers, you find their names, you find maybe it's a guest form where somebody slept with all their information, the people they slept with, just as one of the examples, but they had a lot of information was shared. So looking into that, and it is all that a challenge. It's a challenge in all of that. So while we're also identifying, we're also looking and working, we are also looking the means and ways which we integrate and bring more people on board to get to understand why we need a data privacy and protection law and how it is best practiced by following relevant principles. We look at, we also look at the powers given to the police. The police themselves, there are a lot of respective authorities which tend to maybe misuse their powers, but in this case, the most detrimental, the detrimental body which has been proven is the police, because then normally when a person is held victim, the police is able to control and sort of collect any sort of information they would need, sometimes irrelevant to the cause. They might come to maybe an office. We have cases where the police go to a center, they collect all the information, the devices and what without a warranty.
Asha, thank you. Thank you so much for thank you so much for shedding some light on the status of legislation in Tanzania. So I can see that there's a question, there are questions on the charts, which I would like Michael to answer. So one of the questions is, what is happening across the continent in terms of governance arrangements that avail data, especially public data sets, for social benefits or development purposes beyond the GDPR? And Brian would also like to hear something about data governance beyond data protection. Michael, if you could.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you to Brian. I've seen sort of a series of questions going through, and I think you're quite right. You know, maybe as a point of departure, there's sort of two narratives, right? One is the need for adequate safeguards when it comes to data protection and the full vindication of the right to privacy. You know, that's being dealt with significantly during this conversation. The points you raise correctly is the relationship between ensuring safeguards and moving towards more enabling environments, where we enact policy and laws that promote development and growth. So some of the developments at the moment, there's effectively two. The first is the Digital Transformation Strategy for Africa, which is a document, I think it was finalized in 2019, but it covers the time period 2020 to 2030. And it's a fascinating document. What that document does, while acknowledging the need for Malabo to enter into force and for there to be privacy safeguards, which I think we all agree with, the document goes significantly further in addressing a series of problem statements when it comes to impediments to development on the continent, and provides a series of policy recommendations which can be used both continentally, regionally, and domestically to really move further into the data governance space. Thank you, Rachel. I've seen the note. So briefly then, you know, Brian, if we look at the Digital Transformation Strategy for Africa, it addresses directly questions of the digital environment, including enabling policy and regulation outside of the data protection space. It looks at digital infrastructure, looks at digital skills and human capacity, and then importantly, it looks at digital innovation and entrepreneurship. And equally, if you have sight of that particular strategy, it makes some, in my view, very bold but important commitments. And I'll just give two examples of looking at enabling laws. The first is that the policy enjoins all people in Africa to have a stable and secure connection of 6 megabytes per second, as one example. And the second is it seeks to create online training measures whereby by 2021, so last year, 100 million people in Africa are to be educated about digital security and digital innovation. And that number is set to increase to 300 million by 2030. Now, whether or not those policy ideals are realistic is a separate question. But the point simply is that this strategy in and of itself paints a very aspirational picture of where we can take data governance as an enabling position over the next 10 years. Briefly then, Rachel, the last, flowing from the strategy itself is the AU Data Governance Framework, which is currently in development. As far as I understand it, it's going to validation later this year. So it may well be published to the latter part of this year or early in 2023. And that policy devolves from this transformation strategy. Brian, I think that's where you will find a slight shift from the safeguard narrative to the enabling narrative. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So for the next question, we'll be having Alan, who will speak to us about the Privacy Symposium Africa, which will be held by Unwanted Witness and CPIT. CPIT is the Center for Intellectual Property Information Technology Law, later this year. Alan, if you could tell us more about the symposium, like what is the purpose of the symposium, and maybe share the top 3 concerns related to privacy and data governance that the symposium will address. So over to you, Alan.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you to everyone who has presented. Thank you, Paul, for that insightful report. We are glad to be part of these talks, and Unwanted Witness has been at the center of data protection, especially in Uganda. Of late, we grew wings, and now we try to look at data protection issues across the continent. The Privacy Symposium Africa is a Pan-African platform that was established by Unwanted Witness in 2019, basically to attract and present, new research reports and information resulting from the trends in the latest technology and latest updates in personal data protection and privacy. So the Privacy Symposium has since offered innovative and quite some interesting legal propositions to different regulators, to different stakeholders generally. It has attracted people from the business community, ICT, academia, and civil society. So basically, the Privacy Symposium Africa is a 3-day event of insightful panel discussions, master classes, and high-value networking, basically discussing issues privacy and data protection. The 4th Privacy Symposium is going to be held in Nairobi. Yes, like Rachel noted, we are hosting it with a Center for Intellectual Property and Information Technology Law at Strathmore University. We're excited. It's bigger and better, as I will elaborate as I go on. It will be held from the 2nd to the 4th of November. It will be a mixture of physical and virtual. So we have a limited number of people who will be invited for the physical event at Strathmore University, and the rest of Africa will have to join us virtually. So data governance in Africa, or in the African continent, has got a lot of issues, clearly like stated by the previous speakers. And it's the reason why Unwanted Witness, decided to have such a platform to discuss and have conversations around some of these problems. And at the symposium, the different, topics and activities that we try to discuss that go up to even the master classes and the presentations. Presentations that we get from the different participants seek to address some of those challenges. But notably, some of the challenges that the symposium seeks to address, and every time we have a symposium around, some of the things that we think we put a lot of interest on is one, that the need to simplify data protection to non-privacy professionals, whose, like Asha kind of noted earlier on, we who are in the civil society or the professionals in data protection, we tend to make privacy and data protection something so big and complicated for people to understand. And this has, in a way, driven away our biggest, stakeholders, who are the non-professionals, non-privacy professionals. So by simplifying data protection to them, this will help get their buy-ins, for them to understand that, look, privacy is an important thing. I think one of the biggest hurdle we've faced over the years is the fact that the people we are trying to sell privacy to, or to fight for, in order for them to understand and appreciate, the right to privacy and enjoy it, don't understand it. So you find someone telling you, if government is taking much of my information, am I a criminal? They can take it. But I think there is need to break it down for them to appreciate that, look, if you don't have the right to privacy, you can't enjoy any other right to speak of. You can't enjoy the right to vote. You can't enjoy the right to participate in any civic participation. You can't associate. You can't express yourself freely because your privacy is infringed. The other need, I think, that we need to we try to put emphasis on during the privacy symposiums that we've held over the years is the need to have, maybe have academia understand that privacy is such an important, or data protection is such an important subject, that they should have it as part of their curriculum. In Uganda, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's only Uganda Christian University, UCU, that has a course unit on cyber law, and data protection is just a small element in that course unit. But there is need to have this included in the curriculum for university, especially in the ICT faculty, the law faculty, and the business faculty. It's very important that this is initiated. So during our conversations, we try to see how we can interest different universities and academia to take up this. But also the other issue that we try to address at the symposium is the need to revise the data protection laws. As Paul clearly noted, a lot more laws have, have challenges. In the advent of artificial intelligence, many of our laws have been rendered useless. When you look at artificial intelligence, in a way it's done by default. People collect personal data without knowing what purpose they're collecting this information. And the key tenet of data protection laws, especially the African protection laws, is that you have to collect personal data having known the purpose of which you're collecting this. So you can't collect someone's personal data without having purpose of why you're collecting this data. But with artificial intelligence, in a way, it collects as much data that it can without even knowing the purpose for it. So in the advent of artificial intelligence, without neglecting the benefits that AI comes along with, how can we have the laws that can speak to the moment without really limiting the benefits that come with artificial intelligence? Of course, the other issue is the need for Africans to understand, to understand the benefits of data that comes with the digital market. I think the reason why many African countries or even legislators or policymakers don't put a lot of importance or attach a lot of importance to the laws is the fact that they don't see the benefit in really regulating data. But the global digital economy, rather market, is growing very fast, and unfortunately Africa contributes very less. So we are reduced to the digital poor. So we only depend on technology. We just consume. We've been reduced to consumers of technology, and yet we are one of the biggest sources of data. So they collect a lot of data from us and then sell to us products of our data, and we end up losing. Yet the big digital, when you look at the figures, the digital economy in the global north, that is Europe and the Americas and China, and the global south, they're really imperfect in a way that Africa contributes less, so that they will realize the benefits that come with digital economy, of which data is the fuel to that digital economy. I think our regulators will get to understand that they need to take this very serious. Then, of course, surveillance. This is an issue that we focus a lot more.
Sorry, Alan, I'm sorry, but we might have to cut you short. Anything against our.
Okay.
But
let me just go through the 3 areas that we are going to look at the privacy symposium. You asked for 3, but the privacy symposium of which these form the basis of the challenges that data governance faces in Africa. We looked at the area of artificial intelligence, and we want to understand machine learning. How can we balance the benefits, that come with artificial intelligence, as well as, respecting the right to privacy. So in that area, we'll look at that, and then data justice, the use of data in digital ID. How can we have data without necessarily excluding the minority or the minority, and how can we do humanitarian work and make sure that the right to privacy of the marginalized is respected? What are the key considerations there? Then cloud storage.
Thank you so much, Alan. I can see that Chris has shared all the details. He shared social media handles and the YouTube page, yes, and the website as well, where you can find out more about the Privacy Symposium Africa. So I will now move on to our panelist from Ghana, and I will ask Selassie to mention 3 key achievements or lessons in data governance in Ghana, and what you think other African countries can emulate. You can do this in 3 to 4 minutes because we are racing against time now.
Against time.
Yeah.
Okay, so all right, so thanks so much, Rachel, and all the panelists that have presented so far. To put this into context, Ghana is a part of the ECOWAS and recently signed to be a part of the AFTA and currently host that secretariat. Ghana has a policy that promotes the use of information technology, which is called the ICT for AD policy, launched in 2003, and currently is being reviewed and is expected to be replaced with the digital economy policy, right? Now, since the use of technology has inherent issues relating to data subjects' rights, data controller responsibility, and regulatory oversight and inefficiencies, we've looked to pass regulations to sort of like guide data governance to ensure that we are protecting the rights, the privacy of the data subject, and not violating, the obligation that data controllers also hold towards them. So 3 things that I think is an achievement for Ghana is 1, the promulgation of the laws. Our constitution itself enshrines that the rights of people are protected. We promulgated the Data Protection Act in 2012, and then we followed it up with the Electronic Communication Act 2008, and then the Cybersecurity Act. Now, beyond those acts that we put in place to sort of like govern data usage, processing, and all of that, we also went ahead to establish regulatory institutions. So key in this case is the Data Protection Commission. Then we also established the Cybersecurity Authority, the National Communication Authority, and then one that seeks to consolidate all the data that is collected in various segments of the economy, i.e. The voters register, the passports, the national security, the national pensions, right? So all of these were consolidated into one institution called the National Identification Authority. Now, in terms of enforcement or, regulation of data protection or data governance, the Data Protection Commission handles this, and they use enforcement. They use accreditation, the creation of a register, building a capacity of data controllers, and sensitizing data subjects to ensure that data governance is inuring to the benefit of the data subject. So like I mentioned, the Constitution is enshrined with the rights of people is enshrined in the Constitution for data controllers to protect their privacy, the same way the Electronic Communication Act. So I'll not go into details of that. Now, one key thing that is causing an issue here for us, and I think most countries can learn from, is the amount of power that the Data Protection Act gives to the Ministry of Communication, right, which is responsible for managing our national infrastructure. The minister has so much power to determine what constitutes accessible processing, right? And sometimes you see that some of those determination goes against the tenets of data privacy and then governance. So the question is, who determines when it is necessary for the privacy of people to be set aside? What constitutes reasonable manner? If you read the laws, conditions under which data could be shared without consent are if it is in a reasonable manner, and to what extent can a data controller not come back to a data subject for consent before they share data? Now, who is also ensuring that if there's a breach of the obligation that data controllers hold towards data subjects, who is ensuring that if there's a breach, there's sanctions or there's punishment, right? We've had so many issues of data breaches, none has been punished. I mean, I've not heard of any that has been punished yet. There's also an issue of the tussle between the data governance tussle, which is the contractual obligation that data controllers hold towards data subjects versus the demand that government agencies / ministries make, and how this has a very thin line for state surveillance or even for social good purposes. So what we are learning from our situation here is that there's unclear processes and conditions around data governance, how data is supposed to be shared, and that is leading to arbitrary actions being taken by people, and that is causing abuse of access. The civil society is also very inactive, so accountability is lacked, is missing. There's weak enforcement, which is leading to a lack of public trust. And then the big one, poor data quality. So because people do not trust the system to ensure that they are protected, or the data governance is done in a way that protects them, they tend to give very false information about themselves, right? A key in this case is recently the government requested for a telco, in fact, all the telcos, to provide the account information and transaction details of all mobile money account holders, right? Now, between the Bank of Ghana and the ministries, there was some form of a tussle, because Bank of Ghana is saying, no, this is against the contractual obligation we have towards protecting the rights, the data of data subjects. The Minister of Communication is saying, no, we also need it to be able to, tax people or whatever, or for revenue assurance purposes, right? So essentially what we need to do to address some of these things is we need to begin to enforce a bit more. We should sanction people who breach, who are not going according to the data governance tenets. We should also be publishing frequently industry reports on data breaches, and then also publish institutions that are in good standing, when it comes to data governance. We should also look at reducing the ambiguity that has engulfed our data governance processes, build a capacity of institutional capacity of both the data controllers as well as civil society, and most importantly, empower the data subjects to be able to speak up for their rights. So these are some of the things that we've achieved and what we are also learning from our own experience here in Ghana.
Thank you, Selassie. Thank you so much for sharing. I would like to proceed to our last panelist for the day, Jacqueline. Data Privacy Brazil has been at the forefront of advocacy for data governance in Brazil. What are the 3 good practices that you can share? If you could share in 3 to 4 minutes, that would be great. Thank you. We cannot hear you.
Now, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, great. Sorry about that again. And thank you for your question. I will try to be brief to talk about accountability. So accountability is one of the main elements to be considered in a data governance policy. So generally speaking, for us, we consider accountability in day-to-day activities, like the demonstration by the agents of the adoption of measures that are effective and capable of proving compliance with rules for the protection of personal data, and even the effectiveness of these measures. So here in Brazil, accountability is foreseen as one of the principles that guide our general data protection law. And I would like to say 3 good practices in that sense are first, risk assessments. Risk assessments is like a tool used to analyze the possible consequences of an initiative on a relevant social interest. So if that initiative could present dangers to those interests. So this tool is going to support an informed decision-making process on whether to start the initiative and under what conditions, being a mechanism for protection and clarification of the possible consequences of that data processing. Then you have a documentation that contains a description .
Hi, Jackie, I think we've lost you.
I think my connection is unstable. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you right now.
Okay. I think my connection is unstable. I'm sorry. Can you hear me, right?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so I'm going to continue. So just to finish up talking about risk assessments, we understand that this should be mandatorily conducted whenever a data processing operation poses high risks to the data subject. And also when conducted by the public administration, we understand they should be publicized in order to allow for public scrutiny. So a second good practice, I think it's monitoring and verification. And that's very important when we talk about cooperation between authorities. So in the Brazilian case, in addition to the National Data Protection Authority, we have other consumer protection authorities that can work together to monitor and act in defense of citizens. So the more cohesive this network is and sharing information about activities and services based on personal data, the more society as a whole will be able to have this accountability process. We had an example of cooperation between authorities in 2021, last year, when our DPA, alongside with the Consumer Authority, the Public Ministry, and the Competition Authority, presented recommendations to WhatsApp regarding its new privacy policy. And finally, I have to talk about transparency. That is this guarantee to citizens, like to us, of clear, accurate, and easily accessible information about the data processing and the respective treatment agents. So it is important that the citizens are aware of their rights and the appropriate measures they can undertake in cases of violation. So transparency is also listed as one of the principles of our General Data Protection Law, or LGPD. So I'll stop here and I'm available for further questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jackie, and thank you to all our panelists for sharing the insights and the information. I hope that you've taken note of what has been shared in the chat. I would like to now conclude the discussion. And if you have any questions, just feel free to reach out to any of the panelists on social media. You can find them on AIRA's page, and I will now ask either Michael or Paul to make a concluding remark in a minute. Either Michael or Paul.
I can jump in and hand over to Paul, maybe just briefly to say there are going to be some key continental developments sort of over the next 6 to 18 months. And I think it's a really crucial time, both for furthering sort of the protection of personal information on the continent, but equally moving into broader questions around data governance. So from a civil society perspective, I think we have a lot of work to do to ensure that there's meaningful and realizable data protection on the continent, while equally fostering digital inclusion and innovation through our data protection framework, so our data governance frameworks. Thank you to everyone for your time.
Thank you so much. I guess that will be all. Over to you, Ashinit. Or Paul. Okay,
I think Paul is there to give close, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, and I want to thank everyone, and on behalf of AIRA and the Ashanat for coordinating this process. Yeah, I think as the discussion has gone, I think it is critical that we note that governments are going to continue collecting and processing people's personal data. The good thing that some of them are really trying to do the enabling laws, although retrospectively. So it is important for us as key players to participate in this process to ensure that whatever laws are eventually enacted or passed really meet the threshold for international, as provided of international frameworks. Where they are not, we should do our best to, one, challenge them in court, but also keep documenting, keep monitoring, and those of us who are doing a lot of capacity building, especially to the communities, let us keep raising awareness to ensure that all data subjects know and understand their rights as data subjects, and they can demand for accountability. And I think it is also important for us to tap into the regional processes to ensure that we get buy-in, but also follow whatever is going on, and then work together as teams, make sure you participate and take the conversation to different platforms like the Privacy Symposium. Can we go and share notes, compare notes, network, to ensure that this is a collective effort? Otherwise, if we work on it individually, we might not succeed as much. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Michael. I guess that will be all. Thank you to the participants for joining us. I can see that Adeboye has shared tools that you can use as it pertains to data governance and data protection. So thank you again, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Rachel, and bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Great job, thanks. Bye. Thanks, Jackie. Thanks, Michael. Okay, bye.
Thank you.
Hello, bye.